Mr. B's, Mr. B's, Mr. B's history. Now then, people, today we are going to look at the position of women in Germany from after 1918. So that's going to cover the period of the Weimar Republic and into Nazi Germany. So let's get going. So, women in Weimar Germany in 1918 underwent a significant change in their roles, in their rights, and in their involvement. So in terms of politics, women got involved formally in the political process for the first time. All women over 21 had the vote. In the first election of the Weimar Republic, about 80% of women voted. On average, throughout the life of the Weimar Republic, about 8% of the Reichstag were women. That's around 32, 33 deputies. By contrast, in Britain, at the similar point, there were 4 female MPs. However, it wasn't all progress. No women were ever appointed to ministerial positions in any government in the Weimar Republic. And female involvement in the Reichstag had declined to about 4.6% on the eve of the Nazi assumption of power in 1933. Employment. Education became compulsory for all up to the age of 18 according to the Weimar Republic. And I think that's important because then if you have equal educational opportunities, you are more likely to get equal employment opportunities. And many women are able to train as lawyers for the first time. About 1.7 million more women are employed in Weimar Germany than before World War I, though due to population growth it is about the same proportion. There's a significant increase in female employment in the professions, 100,000 teachers, about 3,000 doctors. However, there was still, as many people are still experiencing today, a glass ceiling. Women were by and large, unable to access the highest level of professions. And although employment improved, the pay for women lagged behind their male counterparts by about a third. And the third way life generally improved for women in Weimar Germany was an improvement in their rights. So they had the right to vote, they had the right to education up to the age of 18 and beyond in higher education actually. They were able to access all professions. According to the Weimar Constitution, marriage was an equal legal partnership between men and women. Article 109 of the Weimar Constitution said that all Germans were equal before the law. And there was a significant increase of sexual freedom, particularly in larger urban centres. So much so that in 1928, Berlin had over 50 lesbian clubs and bars, such as the Violetta Club, or Damen Club Violetta, as you can see in the advert there. Not all things had changed, so reproductive rights had not really developed. So abortion remained illegal in Germany throughout the Weimar Republic. So what I want us to get away from is this idea that women are some homogeneous group. There are many different sorts of women in Germany. And in an article in 1927 in Germany identified 3 sorts of different types of women. And I think it's important to keep this in mind when we talk about women as some sort of singular block in Germany. So there's the Germanic Gretchen, the traditional German housewife and mother, as shown in this picture. There's the youthful Americanized girl, usually in urban centres, who often went to the cinema to see what the latest Hollywood fashions were. Today we might call them, certainly if they were living in America, we might call them flappers. And then thirdly, this article identifies a boyish, sharp-dressed, masculine, sort of garçon type person, as exemplified by the image here. So when we talk about women, as in virtually every other aspect of history, there are subdivisions, subsets. One size clearly does not fit all. So let's pull it together very quickly. What did it mean to be a woman in Weimar Germany? Remember, that's from 1918 through to the early months of 1933. Well, during the Weimar Republic, women had greater choice in their lives than ever before, in terms of employment, in terms of rights, in terms of increased gender freedoms. Women could participate in politics at all levels. However, and I think this is really important, because in a way there is a reaction to this liberation that Weimar women experienced in Nazi Germany. I want to draw the attention to the last bit of this bit of the video. Many of the rights and opportunities granted to women in the early years of the Weimar Republic were not universally welcomed by either men or women. I know it may seem strange to you that many women did not want greater freedoms and greater changes, but I'll just point out to you that you've all heard of the suffragettes in the British movement to get the vote for women. Well, the Female Anti-Suffrage Society was a much bigger organisation than the suffragettes. It had far more female members than the suffragettes. So just because there is a group wanting something doesn't mean that's a universal thing. And I really want you to hold on to that as we progress further on. Okay, so now we're going to explore the changing position of women in Nazi Germany. So we've seen how, broadly speaking, rights and involvement have improved for women since 1918. That changes significantly after the Nazis get power in early 1933. So we move from this more confident, liberated style of some women in Germany, as seen by Marlene Dietrich in the infamous film The Blue Angel, to this more Nazi-focused, idealised Gretchen-type woman staying at home, bringing up a family. Okay, and I want you to think of this, how this change was achieved by RIP. Not that it's because it's the death of anything, but just because those initials are a useful way of thinking about how the Nazis go about change, as we'll see in the next section. So, women in Nazi Germany, how does it change? Think about RIP, think about restrictions, think about incentives, think about persuasion. But let's go back a step. What did the Nazis want? Well, they were a male-dominated organisation. Hitler personally had many traditional conservative views. The Nazis were particularly worried about the falling birth rate, which had gone down significantly since the beginning of World War I. The Nazis had promised to reduce unemployment, particularly for men. And their views can be summed up in the famous phrase, children, kitchen, church. So how did they go about trying to get these views into German society and transform it, remodel it in their own image? So they introduced a number of restrictions. So the law for the reduction of unemployment in 1933 gave women some incentives to stay at home. But they restricted women from being judges in 1936. They removed women from civil service. And a number of other restrictions came into being. And we'll look at some of those potentially later for non-Aryan women. There were incentives. You could get 1,000 Reichsmark loan once you were married. And 25% of that loan didn't have to be repaid for every child that you had. However, the loan was conditional on the woman not having a job for at least the first 6 months of marriage. This was pretty popular in Germany, as there are over 1.5 million loans granted during their lifetime of the Nazi regime. Birth was encouraged as well by an incentive scheme called the Mother's Cross. You received medals of bronze, silver and gold for the number of children that you had. You got a gold medal if you had 8 children, and I only came across this recently. If you had 10 children or more, the 10th child would officially have Adolf Hitler as their godparent. There's a thought. And then finally there's that persuasion, not always subtle, not always gentle. So you had that church kitchen and children. You have numerous propaganda posters, and you have compulsory membership of the female equivalent of the Hitler Youth, the League of German Maidens, which focused on womanly attributes of fitness, health, childbirth, running a house. So Nazi policies were about restrictions, about incentives, about persuasion, RIP. But did they work? Well, on the surface, looking at that picture of all those babies and these graphs, it suggests that they probably did to some extent. The number of marriages per 1,000 people went up from 7.9 to 11.2. So significant increase in the number of marriages. Whether that was due to the loan, we're not exactly clear. The birth rate increased from 14.7 to 20.3. So that seems like a very significant increase, and I suppose it is, but it's still significantly below German reproductive levels of 1913, which came in at 26.9 per 1,000. However, although there was an initial decline, female employment actually increased by over 2.4 million during the pre-war Nazi regime. Now, this was partly because that men were increasingly recruited into the army, but it was also because still women were paid less than men, and it was an opportunity for companies to be able to meet various production targets or employment requirements and not pay out as much money. So broadly speaking, as far as women's lives were concerned, they lost lots of freedoms. All of these gay clubs got closed down. They were expected to dress in more traditional ways, and the Nazis seem to have achieved their goals of more marriages and more babies. However, far too often the dark side of Nazi policies towards women are not looked at carefully enough, in my view. So we're going to go there. The picture that you see at the background of this section of the video is actually a euthanasia truck. The people are going to be loaded onto that truck and locked in and gassed to death. Yes, you heard it right, gassed to death. This was part of something called the T4 program. So the dark side. The first one, that if you weren't of pure Aryan race, was to discourage marriage. So from 1935, pure Aryan Germans were not allowed to marry non-Aryans, be they Jewish, be they Romani Gypsy, or of a different ethnic group. That was banned. But things got darker, things got worse. In 1933, the law for the prevention of offspring with hereditary diseases was passed, which led to the forced sterilisation of about 400,000 Germans, men and women. And then it gets worse. As part of something called this T4 program, around 250,000 Germans were killed because of some perceived disability, be that physical, be that mental. So when we look at Nazi Germany and we talk about the desire to increase marriages, increase births, okay, that was only for the, as they would see it, the right sort of Germans. And this stylish looking young woman, Helene Label, I sometimes like to put a name and a face to tragedy, was one of around 250,000 Germans who were killed in the T4 program because she had a perceived disability which the Nazis did not want passed on. So there you go. Weimar women, increased freedoms. Nazi women, increased restrictions, increased marriages, increased births, widespread, horrible forced sterilisation and killing. So, moving on. It is possible that you would get a question in your Germany paper about women. Now, that question could be about the Weimar Republic, i.e. 1918 to 33, or it could be, as in this case, Nazi Germany. Okay, and we all want to get full marks because you're all revising hard. You've all worked hard for 2 years and you want to get full marks. So what do you need to do to get full marks? Well, you need to use a complex explanation of changes with accurate knowledge and understanding. Okay, examiners really talk like that, don't they? But let me make it simples. What does complex actually mean? What do you have to do? Well, you can talk about more than one sort of change. How changes in employment or changes in the birth rate. And you can do that about how they tried to encourage it or force it and what effect it had. So it was talk about more than one sort of change. Don't just talk about babies. Talk about other things. That there are differences over time. So you could talk about that initially the Nazis attempt to reduce female employment, although later it actually increases. You could talk about differences between groups. So Nazis encourage marriage between Aryan groups, but discourages it between Aryans and non-Aryan people. And of course, you've got this whole horrible idea that in trying to increase the birth rate, and in some cases they actually forced sterilisation. But you must add specific details and facts. So you can't just say those things. You've got to talk about 250,000 people euthanized in the T4 program for disability. Okay, if you can't remember specific numbers, you could make it a bit vague. So in 1939, female employment had increased by over 2 million. That's true. The actual number is 2.4, but if you can't remember that, don't worry. So, complex can be simples. Complex can be simples. Don't get stressed, people. We're nearly there. You're going to do well. Think about differences. Don't talk about, just like those 3 different sorts of women in Weimar Germany, don't just look at one type of impact on the lives of women at one moment in time. Look at different groups of women over different periods of time in different areas of their lives: employment, marriage, birth rate, fertility, etc. And you will be fine. Now, the next slide is not to do with women in Weimar Germany, but it's one of my hobby horses. I really believe it is important that you understand that things can happen in what you would describe as normal countries rather than just, if you like, the Nazi regime. It's too easy, in my opinion, to say, oh, what happened in Germany was because the Nazis were evil. And yes, they were, and it was horrible. But things also happen in countries that you might be surprised about. And I think it's my duty as a historian to warn you about that so that we keep on our toes, fight the good fight, and oppose the infringements of any group of people's rights, because it can lead to horrible things. So let's pick a country random, or I don't know, USA, the so-called land of the free, a democratic country. Surely that can't be comparable to Nazi Germany's policy towards forcible sterilisation. Or can it? Here's a newspaper clipping from, I think, early 1930s. How Kansas develops fitter families, experimenting eugenics. Eugenics means selecting the people who can and can't have babies, either peaceably or forcibly. This is a map showing all the states in the Americas in the 1930s that passed laws about sterilisation. Now, that could be forcible, it could be about disability, but it was going on in the States in the 1930s. So you might think, well, it's the 1930s, things were different then. Well, look at this one then. This is a graph of sterilisation, forced sterilisation rates in one state in the United States from 1938 to 1966. The red line is the rate of forced sterilisation amongst black women. Black women. Look at how much higher it is than white women, suggesting potentially a racial background to the reasons for that happening. Bit of detail about it. In the United States, it's estimated that up to 50% of all Native American women were sterilised between 1970 and 1976. 1976. I was at primary school then. Oh my word. Black women in the 20th century were much more likely to be forcibly sterilised. In the 20th century, overall in the United States, over 100,000 black, Latino, Native American women have been forcibly sterilised. There are stories of women, young women, sometimes almost children, going into hospital for what they believed was a tonsillectomy and coming out being sterilised. So you might say, well, 1960s, that's a long time ago, that's over 60 years ago. Well, forced sterilisations seem to still be going on in some United States prisons as late as 2010. So, we value our rights, we value our freedoms, and those need to apply to everyone. Yes, it happened in Nazi Germany. Yes, it was largely the result of the foul dictatorial Nazi regime. But it's not always the case that dictatorships do bad things. Democracies also can do bad things. So be on your toes, people. Don't let people's rights and freedoms be challenged. As ever, I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. I've been Mr. B. Hopefully you've been at least a moderately interested audience. Thank you and good luck.